Born into slavery in Diamond Grove, Newton County, Missouri, in January 1865 during the American Civil War, George Washington Carver was the son of slave parents Mary and Giles, who was purchased for $700 by Moses Carver, a German-American migrant. George was kidnapped by 8 raiders from Arkansas along with his sister and mother when he was just a year old, but his brother was hidden away from the kidnappers. The 3 were sold off as slaves in Kentucky, but the kidnappers were chased down by Moses Carver, who hired John Bentley to find them, and only George was found, negotiated for, and returned. George and his brother James were then raised as the children of Moses and his wife after slavery was abolished. George received encouragement from them to pursue education, while Moses' wife, Susan, taught him the basics of how to read and write. But despite the abolition of slavery, black people were still not allowed to attend public schools in Diamond Grove, so George attended a school for black children in Neosho and had to walk for miles to school. When asked his name by his class teacher, Maya Watkins, he told her he was Carver's George, which is how he had identified himself. But then Watkins called him George Carver, which became his name. She also admonished him in the words, "You must learn all you can, then go back out into the world and give your learning back to the people," and those words remained in his mind. George had to move to another foster home in Fort Scott, Kansas, when he got admitted to the academy there at the age of 13. But after being at the scene where a black man was killed by a group of whites, he left the city. He then attended several other schools and finally earned a diploma from the Minneapolis High School. To further his studies, he applied to several colleges but only got accepted at Highland University in Highland, Kansas. But on arrival at the university, George was refused entry because of his race. Finances also stood as a disadvantage to his studies, so in early 1888, George took a loan of $300 at the Bank of Necessity to further his studies and started studying piano and art at the Simpson College in Iowa. In 1891, George was the first black student of Iowa State Agricultural College, now Iowa State University, studying botany, which he was encouraged to pursue by his college art teacher, Etta Bod, who had noticed his love of painting flowers and plants. He spent the next 2 years researching in plant pathology and mycology at the Iowa Experiment Station, and it gave him national recognition and acknowledgement as a botanist. In 1896, he gained his Master's of Science degree and got employed as the first black faculty member at the university. That same year, he became the head of the Tuskegee Institute Agriculture Department, a position given to him by Booker T. Washington, who was the principal of the school, and George taught there for 47 years. He thought of ways to make the study of agriculture interesting and came up with an idea he called Jesup Wagon, a designed mobile classroom that took education out to farmers. It was named after Maurice Ketchum Jesup, a philanthropist who funded the program. Although George did try to resign several times from Tuskegee, each time Washington smoothed things out. In 1911, George joined the Gamma Sigma chapter of Phi Beta Sigma fraternity. He also delivered a speech at the 1930 conclave held at Tuskegee, which was considered powerful and emotional. George gave his concentration on his research and experiments from 1915 to 1923. He used peanuts, soybeans, pecans, and sweet potatoes, and lots of other crops for his experiments. This research, which collided with his speech at the National Conference of the Peanut Growers Association in 1920, with his testifying before Congress the next year in support of tariffs on imported peanuts, amassed him a great amount of fame and publicity as one of the well-known African Americans of his time. George also developed ways in which depleted soils from repeated planting of cotton can be improved with the assistance of other agricultural experts. He urged farmers to use nitrogen in their soils through the practice of crop rotation. He then established an industrial research laboratory where, together with his assistants, they worked to make new crops popular by developing hundreds of them. His works put him in the spot of admiration from the likes of President Theodore Roosevelt, who publicly admired George's work. His promotion of peanuts gave him publicity in 1916. He was inducted as a member of the Royal Society of Arts in England. His newfound fame only made him more enthusiastic about peanuts, and in 1919 he wrote to the peanut company about the possibility of making peanut milk. But the fame also meant traveling around promoting 6 agricultural papers after his appearance at the Congress. He published his works on peanuts in industry journals and also wrote for a syndicated newspaper column, Professor Carver's Advice. In the course of his life, he met with 3 American presidents, Theodore Roosevelt, Calvin Coolidge, and Franklin Roosevelt. Also, the then Crown Prince of Sweden did a 3-week study with George. George was even credited in 1932 by James Saxon Childers, a writer, that his peanuts products were solely responsible for the rise of the US peanut productions. George created a museum of his works by the time he was in his 70s, as well as the George Washington Carver Foundation at Tuskegee in 1938, donating almost $60,000 of his savings to establish the foundation. But he was never married, although he had a 3-year courtship with Sarah L. Hunt when he was 40, and when he was 70 years, he built a friendship with Austin W. Curtis, who was a scientist whom George bequeathed his royalties to during his life and even after his death. At the age of 78, George fell down a flight of stairs, which led to his death at the hospital on January 5, 1943. He was buried next to his friend and employer, Booker T. Washington, at Tuskegee University, and the following words were inscribed on his grave: "He could have added fortune to fame, but caring for neither, he found happiness and honor in being helpful to the world." Due to his illness at birth, he was not expected to live beyond 21 years, yet he lived longer, which deepened his faith in God. He also believed in sciences and found a way to integrate both of them into his life, also maintaining a relationship with other Christians whom he relied on during the time he was criticized by the scientific community. George's honor came in 1977. George's honor led to the Hall of Fame for Great Americans, and in 1990, the USDA Hall of Heroes, as the father of Chemogi, was again inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. The Iowa State University also posthumously awarded James, a doctor of